The photograph shows them gathered on a worn wooden porch, the summer air heavy with the scent of pine and wet earth. Jeremiah Thornfield stands behind his wife Constance, hands resting over her shoulders with a careful pride, while their 6 children arrange themselves in the formal rigidity of late Victorian portraiture. Mercy holds the youngest, Samuel, a fragile bundle of dark hair and serious eyes, as though she is already protecting him from some unseen force. The twin boys, Elias and Ezra, stare outward with identical expressions, the same strong jaw and piercing gaze, yet something in their eyes resists scrutiny, a tension that makes the air around them feel thin, electric. The girl of 14 sits stiffly beside her mother, hands folded, lips pressed tight, while Caleb, 11, leans casually against the porch railing. But even his posture cannot hide a trembling that lingers in the bones of the photograph. On first glance, the Thornfields appear the embodiment of mountain propriety, prosperous, devout, respectable. But the details are subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual eye. The children's eyes glimmer with traces of recent crying. Behind them, etched into the porch wall, are faint scratch marks, clawed into the weathered wood with desperate energy. There is a story carved into that surface, one that speaks of attempts to flee, of punishment masquerading as devotion, of devotion twisted into terror. Whisper Valley, West Virginia, in the late summer of 1884, is a place cut off from the world. Roads that wind through the mountains carry only the determined, the curious, or the unwary. Families like the Thornfields exist in the liminal space between isolation and scrutiny, their lives recorded only in ledger entries, church rosters, and occasional photographs taken by itinerant photographers. These images, meant to capture prosperity and piety, sometimes preserve shadows of unspeakable acts. By 2019, when Dr. Elena Vasquez first examined this photograph, it had spent 135 years in the care of Thornfield descendants, surviving house fires, floods, and the migrations that emptied valleys of their children. Under magnification, the photograph became less a portrait and more a confession. The hands of mercy tighten over Samuel's small frame, not with maternal tenderness, but with desperate vigilance. The twins' identical faces hold strain, concentration, a silent warning, and the scratches on the porch, their jagged edges almost imperceptible, tell of an attempt to escape something unthinkable. It is a photograph frozen in time, yet alive with horror. It records a moment before violence, a moment before despair descended into permanence. A family's facade is intact, the cracks run deep, hidden in plain sight, preserved in silver and cardboard, waiting for the careful eye to recognize the marks of fear. Which city are you watching from? And what time is it right now? Whisper Valley is a pocket of Appalachia that maps of the time scarcely acknowledge. Its ridges and hollows twist so tightly that sunlight falls in long, uneven shafts, and mist lingers like emery, refusing to be dispersed. By 1884, fewer than 50 families inhabit the valley, clustered near the general store, the schoolhouse, and the Methodist chapel that doubles as a meeting hall. The Thornfields are at its center, their home a modest 2-story frame, freshly painted shutters marking a claim to success, and a porch sturdy enough to display the illusion of order. But appearances deek. Beyond the painted boards, the valley is already whispering of things that should not be named aloud. Jeremiah Thornfield owns a small lumber operation, one of the few sources of wealth in the mountains. The mill hums in daylight, its wheels grinding, carrying the scent of sawdust and resin. He is respected, even admired. The traveling preachers who lodge in his house speak of his piety. He contributes generously to the church, to building projects, to the moral life of the valley. Neighbors point to the Thornfield children as paragons of propriety, their clothes neat, their manners meticulous, their silence in church absolute. The illusion is complete. But in the still hours between midnight and dawn, the valley is not at peace. Strange sounds drift through the hollows, muffled cry. The scuff of bare feet across floorboards, the whispered recitation of scripture that no one outside the home can quite follow. The valley knows the rhythms of its residents. When something is off, it is felt in the bones, and the Thornfields, whose facade is so pristine by day, are already writhing under the weight of a darker devotion. The children, while outwardly composed, show subtle sig of unease. Samuel, the youngest, rocks quietly in Mercy's arms, his small hands gripping her dress as if to anchor himself to something stable. Caleb, leaning against the railing, presses his thumb to his lips, a gesture learned from habit and fear. The twins' faces are fixed, unnaturally, their eyes darting almost imperceptibly toward the forest edge, as if anticipating an approaching danger. Even Constance, seated before Jeremiah, cannot fully mask the tension that trembles beneath her carefully maintained composure. The valley remembers, in fragments. Farmers speak cautiously of noises heard at night, of shadows moving across the Thornfield property, of lights burning in rooms long after the household should have slept. Some families dismiss these recollections as imagination, other as the natural exaggerations of isolation. But in 2019, when the photograph resurfaces in a trunk of family memorabilia, those whispers gain clarity. Dr. Vasquez, examining the image, begins to trace lines of unease that cross decades, ledger entries, court documents, medical notes. Each one threads back into this valley, this home, this moment captured in silver nitrate. The landscape itself, seems complicit, wrapping the valley in isolation, carrying the echoes of fear in the wind, and leaving no path for those seeking to escape. The mountains do not lie, but they do conceal. And in Whisper Valley, the Thornfield's house stands at the center of a horror that has been building, silently, invisibly, for years. It is here, among the ridges and shadows, that the first cracks in the family's life begin to widen, and the children, already marked by subtle terror, begin to understand the rules of a house governed not by law, but by fear. Samuel's first memories are of shadows and whispers. The house is always filled with the scent of pine and candle wax, but beneath it lingers something acrid, something metallic that the children never name. Mercy, though barely an adult herself, ACTS as surrogate mother, her hands gentle yet tense, her eyes constantly scanning the dark corners of rooms. The twins, Elias and Ezra, already speak in a language of gestures, subtle signals learned in long nights of enforced stillness. They understand that sound can bring punishment, that curiosity can be punished with hands, with rods, with scripture twisted into implements of terror. The Thornfield children are raised with ritual as much as with discipline. Every meal is preceded by prayer, every chore punctuated with quiet instruction on obedience. But the rituals are distorted. Jeremiah insists that some prayers require physical endurance, that devotion can only be proven by suffering. The children learn to conceal bruises beneath their clothing, to hide tears behind polite smiles, walk through the house as if every footstep might betray them. Even the walls seem to hold their secrets. Scratch marks etched into the porch and interior boards hint at the attempts that Mercy and others make to flee, attempts thwarted by the house itself, by locks, by bars, by their father's insistence that escape is sin. Visitors arrive intermittently, preachers traveling the region, their PR, accents meant to confirm the family's piety, but often bringing more than prayers. They observe the children, ask questions in tones that the adults control, their eyes flicking with something the children cannot name. Mercy learns quickly to smile for them, but behind her smile, terror coils like a serpent. The twins, already unnervingly perceptive, note the unsaid, the patterns, the strange extra. NGs of nods, the subtle alignment of adult behaviors that speak of threats far beyond a child's comprehension. Even Constance, though loving and determined, finds her role shifting from mother to co-conspirator by necessity. She shields what she can, counsels obedience when survival demands it, and prays silently for reprieve. But in the long corridors of the Thornfield house, the shadows grow heavier each year, filling corners with shapes of dread. The youngest, Samuel, begins to cry at night, murmuring words he cannot fully articulate. His cries echo through rooms and halls where no one listens, muffled only by the fear of being overheard. The children begin to leave subtle marks of their own, hidden carvings on beams, tally marks in the attic, scratches on bedroom floors. These are N.O.T. signs of play. They are records of survival, of despair, of resistance that must remain unseen. The house, seemingly ordinary in its frame and roof, becomes a prison of ritual and secrecy, its foundations soaked with fear and unspoken screams. Outside, the valley's residents hear only fragments, a muffled scream, the occasional sight of Mercy running to the forest edge, only to be returned. The Thornfields remain a model of propriety in the daylight, but by night, the children are already learning the cruel rules of a world where piety and punishment are inseparable, where obedience is measured in flesh and spirit alike. And in this household, in this forgotten valley, the true horror begins to grow, not in the moments the world sees, but in the moments the world will never know. Night falls early in Whisper Valley, and the Thornfield house transforms. The warm light spilling from the windows by day becomes a pale, flickering glow against the darkness, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the floorboards. Jeremiah's rituals grow more elaborate as the year 1884 deepens. What began as prayer and discipline twists into something darker, something unspoken in public, but meticulously chronicled in the privacy of his ledgers. Candles are arranged in precise patterns, symbols carved into floors and walls, and the children are made to kneel in positions that test endurance and obedience beyond their years. Mercy, now 19, begins to carry the weight of responsibility that is both natural and unnatural. She learns to anticipate her father's moods, to interpret the smallest gestures of his hands and eyes. Her body and mind are no longer her own. Every movement is governed by fear, by the expectations of a man who invokes scripture to justify acts of cruelty. The twins, though older, remain eerily silent, their identical faces masks for emotions too dangerous to display. Caleb and the 14-year-old daughter mimic composure, hiding trembling limbs, Anne, restless eyes, and Samuel, though small, absorbs the tension as acutely as the others. His nights filled with nightmares of shadows pressing close, of whispers calling from beyond the walls. Traveling preachers continue to visit, their names recorded in Jeremiah's meticulous accounts. One, Cyrus Reed, stands out. His presence carries an almost magnetic authority, yet beneath it lurks something more. Reed speaks in measured tones about obedience, purity, and the sacred duty of fathers to guide their households. His teachings pervert the family's faith into instruments of control, and Jeremiah, eager to prove himself both pious and disciplined, embraces these lessons with zeal. The children, though outwardly compliant, sense the growing danger. They understand that disobedience is no longer met with mere reprimand. Punishment carries with it a ritualistic finality that lingers long after the pain has ended. At night, strange sounds echo through the valley. Screams rise and fade, muffled by walls, by doors, by the thick mountain air. Animals, once plentiful on the property, vanish mysteriously. The valley's few neighbors whisper of the strange rites performed under the cover of D.A. Arcaness, of lights burning in the woods, of figures moving too quickly and too deliberately to be human. No one investigates. The fear of confrontation and the weight of social propriety suppress questions. Inside, the children leave subtle evidence of their suffering, scratches in wood, tally marks hidden beneath floorboards, secret carvings in attic beams. These marks are their testimony, silent, but undeniable, a record that will survive long after the voices are stilled. Each day, the Thornfield household becomes a theater of ritual and terror, where love is suffocated by fear, and devotion is measured not in kindness, but in endurance. And in this isolated valley, where the hills hold every secret and the forests swallow every scream, the true nature of the horror begins to reveal itself. It is not merely discipline or fear. It is a carefully constructed, systematic corruption of the family itself, sanctioned by twisted belief, enforced by authority, and hidden beneath the veneer of piety. The summer of 1884 closes with a stillness that feels unnatural, a pause in the valley as if the mountains themselves are holding their breath. Inside the Thornfield house, the air is thick. Why? The residue of fear, of whispered commands, and of the ceremonies that have grown increasingly sinister. Mercy, the eldest, senses a shadow looming over her life, one that is not cast by the walls or the trees, but by the very hands that should protect her. Her body carries the memory of repeated punishments, her mind calculating each step, each glance, each word to avoid wrath. But there are Lee. It's even the most careful child cannot surpass. The scratch marks on the porch, faint but jagged, record her desperation. Weeks before the photograph is taken, she tries to flee toward the forest, to vanish into the dense trees that might swallow her, even if only for a moment. Jeremiah intercepts her, dragging her back with force justified through scripture, his hands steady and unyielding. The twins watch silently, understanding that intervention is not possible, that survival demands stillness. Samuel, unaware of the full extent, clings to his sister, sensing her panic and absorbing it as though it were his own. Cyrus Reed's influence continues to grow, his doctrine woven into every corner of the house. What begins as guidance in morality and faith mutates into control over flesh and spirit. The ceremonies Jeremiah enacts are no longer simple trials of endurance, they are mechanisms of subjugation, of obedience demanded through fear, ritual, and manipulation. Mercy, the intended instrument of the next ritual, feels the weight of this design crushing her. Her body is prepared, her compliance demanded, but her mind rebels quietly, carving secret spaces in the attic and on the PO. RCH walls for the truth she cannot voice. The valley itself remains ignorant, or perhaps unwilling to see. Farmers glimpse figures moving late at night, hear the muffled wails of children, smell smoke from the hearth that burns far past necessity. Complaints are whispered, dismissed, or redirected by those who know Jeremiah's reputation, by those who fear becoming implicated in a corruption that is both intimate and untouchable. Outside, the mountains hold everything, the shadows, the screams, the silent witness of the land itself. Constance, once merely a mother, now occupies the role of protector in a system that offers her little power. She navigates the rituals, the visits, the subtle threats, preserving what she can of her children's innocence. Yet even her strength is finite. She tennesses what cannot be named, what cannot be stopped, and records it in hidden journals and private pleadings that she prays may survive her family's isolation. It is in this tension, the hidden terror, the forbidden knowledge, the careful observance of every movement, that the 1884 photograph gains its significance. Beneath the smiles, beneath the rigid postures, lie the traces of horror, the terror. Or Mercy cannot hide, the twins' strained expressions, the faint scratches that speak louder than any words. The image, meant to commemorate prosperity, inadvertently preserves the seeds of a darkness that will later shock historians and descendants alike. By the end of summer, the house no longer feels like a home. Each room carries a memory of obedience enforced through terror. Candles burn low. In windowless chambers, their flickering light revealing the pale faces of children whose innocence has been measured, catalogued, and broken. Jeremiah's devotion to Reed's teachings has mutated into something beyond comprehension, a ritualized control over every aspect of his family, where obedience is demanded through fear and love is twisted into subjugation. Mercy, 19, becomes the focus of the darkest rites. Her body, once protected only by youth, is now subject to what Jeremiah calls purification, ceremonies that distort scripture into instruments of sexual dominance. Constance, powerless yet courageous, tries to shield her daughter, moving between rooms like a ghost, whispering prayers no one else hears. But the isolation of the valley, the authority of her husband, and the complicity of Reed's ideology leave her nearly defenseless. The twins, Elias and Ezra, are forced to witness the rituals, their silence a survival mechanism, their expressions masks that conceal horror far beyond their years. Caleb, mute from the early years of trauma, communicates only in gestures or scribbled notes. The youngest, Samuel, too small to understand fully, absorbs the tension, the fear, the silent commands of a household governed by scripture twisted into cruelty. It is in this oppressive atmosphere that Mercy's final desperate attempts to resist are etched into the very walls of the house. Scratch marks on the porch and interior beams record the moments when she tried to flee, when the forest seemed like a sanctuary, when escape was the only possible hope. Each failure tightens the noose of control, embedding terror into memory, into posture, into the very act of being. By the time the photograph is taken, the children have learned to conceal everything but what the camera cannot hide: their fear. Mercy's grip on Samuel is protective, yes, but it is also desperate, as if she alone can anchor him to life against the ritualized violence that surrounds them. The twins' identical faces betray strain, concentration, and a silent warning. Constance's hands tremble just enough to be visible to the camera, her face a mask of calm in a house where terror reigns. Outside the house, the valley remains oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind. The Thornfield's outward appearance of propriety masks the corruption within. Jeremiah continues to attend church, to lend funds, to maintain his place as a pillar of the community. Reed moves between households, leaving a trail of whispered influence, his network of complicit patriarchs growing quietly, invisibly spready. The same corruption, the same rituals, the same control. The 1884 photograph, when examined decades later, will reveal all this in silence. The terror etched into eyes, the clawed escape attempts in wood, the careful, practiced composure of children who have seen the unthinkable. It becomes not a portrait of prosperity, but a document of horror, frozen in silver and cardboard, a testament to a household where devotion became domination, and love became a tool of subjugation. By the winter of 1884, the valley begins to stir with unease. Whispers creep along the ridges and hollows carried by wind and fear. Neighbors remember cries that could not be dismissed, shadows that move too deliberately, smoke from late-night fires that illuminates shapes no one dares name. Farmers whisper of me. RCY's flight attempts, of figures dragged back from the forest, of children seen standing at windows, pale and motionless, as if frozen between hope and terror. The valley knows something is wrong, but the weight of propriety, faith, and fear keeps tongues tied. The church becomes a silent observer, its ministers aware of the rumors yet unwilling to confront a family whose contributions maintain both building and reputation. Even Sheriff Tobias Crawford, custodian of law and order, dismisses complaints with a perfunctory nod. Reports of wailing, chanting, and unexplained injuries are noted and filed away, then ignored. Community cohesion, the fear of scandal, and the subtle influence of Jeremiah's wealth conspire to preserve silence. The valley's moral compass bends beneath the gravity of secrecy. The house itself begins to deteriorate under the strain of human cruelty. Animals vanish. Floors creak under the weight of hidden trauma. Doors and window locks, purchased from Jeremiah's ledgers of unusual expense, confine more than bodies. They trap memories, fear, and suppressed screams. Constance attempts to intervene where she can, but her authority is limited, and every act of risks punishment for herself and her children. Then, one night, the culmination of years of whispered terror erupts. The valley bears witness as fire consumes barns, sheds, and eventually the Thornfield home. Neighbors rush to help, but the family resists intervention until the flames threaten all. Windows shatter, smoke fills rooms where rituals once took place. Scratches on walls tally arcs hidden in beams, and the echoes of terrified footsteps are all obliterated in the blaze, leaving only charred wood and the faintest trace of what transpired. Animals trapped inside perish, the valley mourns them silently. Yet even in destruction, some evidence survives. A photograph, faint scratches on its surface, a ledger, a journal, artifacts preserved by accident, by luck, by someone too careful to let history erase them entirely. It is in these fragments that the truth begins to surface decades later. Researchers, archivists, and genealogists would later piece together a tapestry of horror concealed by both fire and fear. The valley returns to its quiet rhythms, as though the blaze were a cleansing ritual in itself, but shadows linger. The memory of the Thornfields, the faint echoes of cries in the ridges, and the scars left on descendants endure. The town has acted, yet only partially, leaving questions, fear, and mystery to ferment quietly, waiting for someone patient enough to uncover them. Decades pass, and Whisper Valley grows quieter still. The mountains remain, indifferent witnesses to history's shadows. Generations forget the full extent of the Thornfield's terror, or even their names fade into local memory, whispered only in fragments by the oldest residents. But in the 1980s, a researcher arrives, a genealogist with an eye for what most would dismiss. Dr. Elena Vasquez combs through archives in Charleston, her fingers tracing faded ink, her eyes scanning ledgers, journals, and photographs that seem innocuous at first glance. It is in a trunk of family memorabilia, donated by a descendant with pride and no inkling of the horrors it conceals, that she finds the 1884 photograph. Mounted on yellowed cardboard, it appears at first to be a simple family portrait. Jeremiah Thornfield stands proudly, Constance seated before him, children arranged in formal poses. Yet something lingers behind their eyes. A tension, a terror, a subtle defiance masked by composure. The scratches on the porch, barely visible, whisper of failed escape attempts and desperate resistance. Dr. Vasquez's curiosity deepens as she cross-references ledger entries with local courthouse records. The irregular expenditures, the payments to traveling preachers, the purchases of locks and construction materials for windowless rooms, all begin to weave a narrative of control, isolati, on, and ritualized abuse. Court documents, sealed for more than a century, reveal Constance Thornfield's brave petition for protection, her testimony describing the escalation of horrors under Jeremiah's guidance. Medical records, rediscovered in private archives, corroborate the abuse, children treated for trauma, malnutrition, and injuries inconsistent with ordinary accidents. Physicians' notes speak of repeated violations disguised as religious discipline, documenting patterns of violence the community refused to see. Even the twins, once silent observers, left evidence in the form of hidden carvings, tally marks in beams, and scratches in floorboards. Each artifact carries the weight of fear and the subtle defiance of children who survived only by hiding their suffering. Vasquez uncovers the broader network as well. Cyrus Reed's followers, patriarchs across 3 states, each complicit in a system that justified control and sexual abuse through corrupted doctrine. The valley's authorities, ministers, and influential families had chosen silence over intervention, safeguarding reputation while allowing abuse to flourish. By the late 1980s, Vasquez has assembled a collection of evidence that transforms whispers into proof, fragments into a coherent story. The photograph, once a mere family memento, now becomes a portal into a past of terror and secrecy. The scratches, the eyes, the posture of each child, it all tells a story the valley tried to bury, one that demands to be seen. The legacy of the Thornfield's abuse stretches across generations, manifesting in trauma, silence, and fear. And yet, through the persistence of researchers like Vasquez, the truth begins to emerge, fragile but undeniable, revealing the consequences of unchecked authority, institutional complicity, and the horrors that can thrive behind the facade of respectability. The 1884 photograph rests now, behind glass at the Appalachian Heritage Foundation, its surface yellowed, its image deceptively serene. Visitors see a family in Victorian formality, a father and mother proud, children composed and orderly. But those who look closer, through magnification, through study, See what history has tried to conceal. The eyes of the children betray terror, the scratches in the wooden porch whisper of desp. Irate escape. And the subtle tension in their postures speaks of unspeakable acts hidden behind the thin veil of propriety. Descendants of the Thornfields and of families connected to Reed's network carried traces of what transpired. Generations wrestle with anxiety, depression, fractured relationships, and unspoken fears, echoes of trauma inherited not through memory but through the body and the psyche. The valley, once complicit in silence, now contends with the legacy of secrecy that allowed abuse to flourish. Families share their stories quietly, in private rooms, in genealogical circles, in whispered conversations that bridge the gap between past and present. The work of Dr. Elena Vasquez and genealogists like Thomas Garrett illuminates what was once obscured. Court records, journals, ledgers and letters converge into a mosaic of horror that spans decades and states. The systematic abuse, sanctioned under corrupted doctrine, hidden behind financial success and social authority, becomes undeniable. Yet the story is not merely about violence, it is about complicity, about the delicate balance between public respectability and private cruelty, about the ways in which communities can both shelter and destroy. The 1884 photograph, once a token of apparent prosperity, is now a memorial of survival. The faint scratches, the strained faces, the anxious posture of Mercy holding Samuel, they preserve a moment of both terror and resistance. They remind us that history is not only what is recorded in newspapers or censuses, but what lingers in shadows, in private documents, in family memories too painful to speak aloud. And so the valley, the house, and the photograph endure. The mountains keep their silence, the forests remember, and the descendants bear the weight of revelation. Justice, delayed by more than a century, has come in part through the uncovering of truth, the courage of survivors, and the diligence of those willing to confront what society long sought to ignore.